In the General tab of the Builder screen for the SQC trend, you'll find all the fundamental things that need to be defined about an SQC chart. So let's take a look at those in real time. I'm going to go over into PI ProcessBook. If you take a look up here, this is our run versus build mode. I'll choose build mode by clicking on the hammer, and then I'll just double click on the SQC trend. And what you're seeing now is the General tab in this Builder screen. Now the General tab is where we give it a name. That name appears on the chart, of course. It's also where we choose which of the 8 fundamental chart types, these are control chart types, that we're going to use for this particular SQC chart. Now again, you could look at volumes and volumes of information about the advantages of using one type of control chart versus the other. For example, one of the rules of thumb we've heard is that X bar charts are great for looking at equipment as it starts to wear out, versus range charts, which is a good way of watching for things like operator errors, people setting set points wrong. Well, as you might guess, there's a tremendous amount of judgment call, or judgment based on your process and based on your understanding of SQC as to which chart you'd like to choose, and you'll find a lot more about that in the PI SQC User's Guide that accompanies this add-in. So this is where we're going to choose the type of chart, and of course the type of chart is going to control what type of inputs we fill out in the rest of this dialog box. I'm going to choose, in this case, a chart of individuals. Now in addition, we have, of course, to specify the chart tag. The chart tag is the name of the PI tag that you're going to be using as the input, and normally that's going to be some kind of a normally distributed tag. Of course, something that's random or has no predictability, of course, would be of no use in this case. In the next section, you define the number of decimal places you use on the y-axis, and also you define the y-axis itself. So for example, this is where I would define my number of decimal places, and right here is where I would define what that range would be. Now right now it's set to auto range, which means it will look at the existing data and it will produce a y-axis that includes everything that's within the range of data that's current on your screen. Now you can choose database, in which case we simply go to the point database on the Pi server to determine what's stored as the 0 and the span for this particular tag. That would be this chart tag up here. Now in addition, and this is a lot more practical, this center line plus or minus a certain number of either engineering units or sigma. So for example, if my center line is, if I'd like to see the traditional SQC chart, the one that you'll find documented most frequently in things like the Western Electric SQC Handbook, etc., you would go with something like center line plus 4 sigma. That means it's going to be surrounding this center line right here plus 4 standard deviations above or below. That's what we're seeing right here. So if you're reducing something outside 3 standard deviations, it's very obvious. And of course that's the classic alarm, the 3 standard deviation alarm. Now we could go to 3, 4, 5 sigma. You could specify the number of sigma standard deviations. You can also specify above or below the center line by specific engineering units, a specific amount expressed in engineering units. And then finally, there's this option called absolute engineering units, which simply means you can type the number that you'd like in engineering units, and that would be the y-axis. Now in this case, as I said, I prefer to look at this using the 4 sigma, plus and minus 4 sigma. So when we finish this up, as I said, you'll see if there are things outside 3 standard deviations, it's pretty easy to spot. The last section in this dialog box is the plot time. This is where we specify the start and the end of the trend. Now as you can see, it defaults to 20 samples before the end time. I should point out that that means we're going to look at whatever the sample size is and produce a trend that shows us 20 results of sampling at that sample size. So for example, if we had a sample size of 3 in something like an X bar chart, with a sample size of 3, 20 samples would be it would actually be the 60 input values that result in 20 samples being displayed. Now when we specify this, we can also specify, instead of samples before end time, we can specify a specific period of time, -4 hours for example, and then the end time would be the current time. That's what the asterisk stands for. In this case, we'll just simply go forward in time 4 hours at a time as we look at the SQC chart. That's without regard to how many samples that represents. And then finally we have this trigger tag change. This is a really nice feature. It allows me to specify a trigger tag, and then it's when that trigger tag changes its value, let's say from one product or grade of product to a second grade of product, then that would be the start of my SQC chart. So in this way, as you switch or transition from one product to the next, we reset the alarms when we reset what's displayed on the SQC chart. Now in this case, I'm going to set this up to, let's go with the default, which is 20 samples before the end time.